Hey friends, I'm the storyteller. Before you get too comfortable, do me a small favor, hit like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy this kind of storytelling. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. This story takes us back to Pune, India, on the 18th of July, 1988, the day Anuj Bidve was born. Anuj came from a happy home. His parents were still together, still in love, still raising their kids with warmth and stability. He had a sister too. I'm not sure if she was older or younger, but what we do know is that the family was close, loving, supportive, the kind of family where everyone showed up for each other. From a young age, Anuj stood out. He was that rare kind of student who was just naturally gifted, academically brilliant, yes, scoring top marks across nearly every subject, but that wasn't all. He was also great at sports, problem solving, even socially. There wasn't much Anuj couldn't do. As he moved through school and into university, that same brilliance followed him. He didn't just get by, he excelled. Professors remembered him. He was one of those students who lit up every class, who raised the bar for everyone else. And then, as he entered his 20s, Anuj started to dream a little bigger. He started to think about what it would be like to study abroad, to explore a new country, expand his perspective, meet new people, push himself even further. And for someone like him, smart, curious, open-minded, it made sense. So he did his research, and eventually one opportunity stood out: a master's in microelectronics at Lancaster University in England. That was it. That was the dream. That course, that university, that country, it felt like everything was aligning. It was what he wanted to do. It was where he wanted to go. So Anuj packed up his life, said goodbye to his family, and boarded a plane to the UK full of excitement, ambition, and hope. He had no idea what was waiting for him. In September 2011, Anuj Bidve, now 23 years old, said goodbye to his family in Pune and flew across the world to start a new chapter in Lancaster, England. It was a huge leap, but from the moment he arrived, Anuj settled in effortlessly. He clicked into university life almost instantly, made friends fast, especially with other international students from India who were on similar paths. They bonded quickly, sharing stories, homesickness, culture, all those things that only they could truly understand. Anuj found people who got him, and he thrived. At the same time, he was crushing his coursework just as everyone expected. His professors saw his potential right away. One of them even described him as an outstanding applicant at the very beginning of a promising career. And it wasn't just about grades. Anuj was happy. He loved his course. He loved the environment. He was building a life, one filled with learning, connection, and possibility. He'd only been there a few months, but it already felt like home. Then came December, and with it, the holidays. Most students were booking tickets, planning trips, flying home to see family for Christmas. But for Anuj and his friends, a flight back to India was out of reach. The prices were just too high, especially for students living on a budget. They weighed their options. And in the end, they made a decision. If they couldn't go home, they'd make Christmas special right where they were. They started planning their own little celebration, a student-style Christmas. They'd get each other small presents, cook together, laugh together, make the best of it. And I think that says a lot about who Anuj was, someone who could adapt, find joy, and make anywhere feel warm, even when home was oceans away. That was the plan. A quiet, cozy Christmas shared with friends who had become like family. To make Christmas feel like more than just another night in student housing, Anuj and his friends decided to take a little trip. They were going to spend a few days in Manchester, explore the city, soak in the festive lights, and most importantly, hit the Boxing Day sales the next morning. That was their big plan. Wake up super early, walk into the city center, and be among the first people at the shops. They knew it wasn't actually that cheap, but still it was about the experience. So as Christmas Day turned into the early hours of the 26th of December, the boys were still awake. Around midnight, maybe 1 a.m., they made a decision Instead of sleeping, they just pull an all-nighter, then head out before sunrise. So just after 1 a.m., Anuj and 9 of his friends set off on foot toward Manchester city center. They were staying somewhere closer to Salford, which meant it would be a long walk, nearly an hour, but none of them had a car. And as students, they didn't have the cash for a taxi. So they just bundled up in the cold, phones out for directions, and walked. As they made their way through the dark, quiet streets, they eventually reached Ordsall Lane, a road in Ordsall, just on the edge of the city. And that's when they saw them. 2 young men on the opposite side of the road, roughly the same age as them. At first, no one thought anything of it, just strangers passing by in the night. But then, one of the 2 crossed the road. He walked straight toward Anuj's group, and his body language was tense, confrontational, angry. He didn't say hello, didn't introduce himself. He was looking for something or someone to lash out at. He walked up and demanded to know the time. So one of the boys checked their phone. "It's 1:30 a.m., they said. And without saying a word, the man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handgun. No one even had time to react. Before they could move, before they could understand what was happening, he raised the gun, pointed it directly at Anuj's head, and pulled the trigger. Just like that. 1 shot. That's all it took. Anuj collapsed, his body hitting the pavement as the shooter shouted, "Run!" to his friend. The 2 of them fled, disappearing into the darkness. And the rest of the group, they were frozen, paralyzed by shock. Their friend, their bright, brilliant, kind friend, was now unconscious on the ground, bleeding from the head. Of course, they didn't chase after the attackers. They couldn't even process what had just happened. All they could do was fall to their knees and try to save Anuj. They called an ambulance immediately, as fast as their fingers could move, but it was already too late. Paramedics arrived within minutes, rushed Anuj to the hospital, did everything they could, but he was pronounced dead on arrival. He was just 23 years old. His life brilliant, bright, full of promise taken in the blink of an eye. No warning, no reason, no explanation, just gone. At the hospital, while doctors confirmed what Anuj's friends already knew in their hearts, police arrived to start piecing together what had happened. But it was hard, almost impossible, because there were no real answers to give. The attack had happened so fast. One moment they were walking together, talking, making plans. The next, a man had crossed the street, asked the time, and pulled the trigger. That's all it took, just seconds. And because it all happened so quickly, none of Anuj's friends had really seen the shooter clearly. The best they could offer were fragments, vague, shaken details from a night that had just changed everything. They told police he was white, slight build, probably around their age, maybe early 20s. He wasn't tall, wore a gray shirt. That was about all they could remember. As for the second man, the one who stayed on the other side of the road, they could recall even less. Just that he was also white, a bit bigger in build, and wore a black jacket. That was it. No names, no direction of escape, no motive, just 2 strangers in the dark and a boy now gone forever. And I think what makes it even more haunting is that Anuj had never even spoken a word to his killer. He didn't argue, didn't provoke. He was just standing there, and for some cruel, unexplainable reason, that was enough. News of Anuj Bidve's murder began to spread the very next morning, but it didn't come from the police. At that point, officials hadn't released a single statement. They were trying to keep the details tight, keep the investigation clean, but word of what had happened was already circulating fast, passed from person to person, community to community. Police were under immense pressure, but they were also being incredibly careful. They didn't want to release descriptions or clues, not yet, because if the killer saw something in the media, they might panic. They might destroy evidence. Take, for example, the gray t-shirt the shooter was said to be wearing. Police believed that shirt could still hold DNA, gunshot residue, or other key evidence. If word got out, and the shooter realized that shirt was a liability, it could be gone forever. So the police held back. But by day 2, the media had become a major issue. Stories were everywhere. And most of them weren't coming from facts, they were coming from assumptions. When it was revealed that Anuj and his friends were Indian and the two attackers were white, the headlines jumped ahead. They began framing the murder as a racially motivated hate crime. And I think this is where things get blurry because, yes, racism does exist and hate crimes are very real. But in this case, there was no evidence, no slurs, no targeted behavior, no motive at all, actually. Not yet. The only reason people assumed it was racially driven was because of the races involved. Even Anuj's friends, the ones who had been there, who had held his hand as he died, said they didn't believe it was a hate crime. It felt random, unprovoked, meaningless. But once a story like that takes hold, it spreads fast. And soon, speculation began to cloud the facts. And the truth, whatever it was still out there. According to investigators, Anuj's murder didn't seem racially motivated. At least, not in the way the media had suggested. It didn't look like the shooter had gone out that night looking for someone Indian to kill. It didn't feel targeted like that. Instead, it looked far more like a crime of opportunity, like someone had gone out looking to hurt someone, anyone. And that person, tragically, was Anuj. Of course, police couldn't rule racism out completely. They were still exploring every possible motive. But early on, they believed this wasn't a hate crime, it was something else. Something even colder. More random. In the days that followed, Anuj's friends poured their hearts out on social media, post after post memories, pictures, kind words, tributes to a friend they'd just lost. It was their way of processing the grief, of holding on to him. But that's how his family found out. Back in India, his parents and sister weren't notified by police first. They logged onto Facebook and saw people posting rest in peace messages for their son. And honestly, I can't imagine the pain of that. Of learning your child has been murdered not through a phone call or a knock at the door, but through a screen, from strangers. Public grief before private truth. Now, to be fair, and I don't say this often about the police, but in this case, they did try to contact Anuj's family. Because of the time zone difference and the family's hectic work schedules, they just hadn't been able to reach them in time. But still, the damage was done. And unfortunately, that moment was just the beginning of many frustrations for Anuj's family. From where they were watching from halfway across the world, it looked like the police weren't doing anything. The investigation was so quiet, no updates, no new leads in the media, nothing that made it feel like progress. But what they didn't know was that this silence was intentional. Police were working hard just out of sight. They gathered hundreds of hours of CCTV footage from around the city, trying to trace the movements of the shooter and his friend. There were no cameras on the exact street where the murder took place, but there were cameras nearby. So officers began trying to piece together their path, where they might have come from, where they ran off to, which direction they disappeared into. They also sent out officers for door-to-door inquiries, speaking with neighbors, asking if anyone had heard or seen anything that night. Simultaneously, they were working on forensic tests, running the autopsy, doing ballistics analysis to figure out exactly what kind of bullet, what kind of gun had been used to shoot Anuj. It was slow. It was quiet. But it was happening. And even though everything I've just described, the door-to-door work, the forensics, the CCTV trawling, sounds like it would take weeks, police moved fast in this case. Within just 3 days, they made an arrest. Actually, not just 5. They had 5 young men in custody, all between the ages of 16 and 20, all loosely matching the descriptions given by Anuj's friends. And considering how vague those descriptions were, white, slim, build, gray shirt, that alone was enough to bring them in for questioning. So, one by one, these 5 boys were brought in for intensive interviews. Detectives grilled them, compared stories, watched for inconsistencies, tried to figure out if one of them was the shooter. Or maybe all of them were involved. But nothing was sticking. There was just so little physical evidence to go on. No murder weapon. No clear CCTV footage of the actual shooting. No reliable eyewitnesses, at least none who saw the attack clearly enough to help. Everything had happened so fast, just a few seconds of chaos. And now, investigators were working with almost nothing. For a while, it looked like all 5 of them might walk. But then, on New Year's Eve, 5 days after Anuj's murder, police made a decision. They released 4 of the suspects and kept one. His name was Kieran Stapleton, a 20-year-old who had grown up in the Ordsall estate, the very neighborhood where Anuj had been killed. A rough area, just west of Manchester city centre, known for violence, antisocial behavior, and a long list of petty crimes. Kieran matched the description given by Anuj's friends. White male, early 20s, slim build. And now that he was their only suspect, police began to look closer. They went back to the CCTV footage, again scanning more carefully now that they had a name and a face. They focused on the streets around the crime scene. They knew Kieran lived nearby, so maybe he'd been caught on camera that night. And sure enough, in the early hours of Boxing Day, they found something. 2 white males walking in the direction of where the murder would soon take place. One of them looked a lot like Kieran Stapleton. Now, it still wasn't conclusive. The CCTV quality wasn't great. It was shadowy, blurry, but it was something. It was a movement, direction, a lead, and then the police found something else. Something that frankly left them cold. In the days following the murder, Kieran Stapleton had gotten a new tattoo. A teardrop, etched just below his eye. If you're unfamiliar with the meaning behind teardrop tattoos, let me explain. In many gang cultures, a teardrop inked below the eye is said to represent a kill one drop for each person the wearer claims to have murdered. It's a symbol of violence, pride, and sometimes grief. So when investigators learned that Kieran Stapleton had gone out and gotten his first ever teardrop tattoo in the days immediately following Anuj Bidve's murder, it sent a very clear message. He wasn't hiding what he'd done. He was wearing it. And as if that weren't disturbing enough, police then discovered where Kieran had been staying since the night of the shooting. He hadn't gone into hiding. He wasn't laying low. He checked into a hotel, one that literally overlooked the crime scene. From his hotel window, Kieran could see everything: the flashing lights, the investigators, the police tape, the corner where Anuj had fallen. And he stayed there for days. It's eerie, almost cinematic in the most awful way, to sit above the place where you took someone's life and just watch. There's no logical reason to do something like that unless you enjoy it. Unless you want to be near the chaos you caused. And for the police, this was it. They had enough. They charged Kieran Stapleton with the murder of Anuj Bidve. But they knew the case wasn't finished. Because Kieran hadn't been alone that night, there was a second man, the one who stood on the other side of the street, the one who ran away with him after the shot was fired. Police needed to find him, too. And surprisingly, they didn't have to look far. When they asked Kieran who it was, he told them without hesitation. It was my mate, Ryan Holden. So now the police had a name. They got in touch with Ryan, and right away, they noticed something. He was terrified, fidgety, nervous, eyes darting, voice trembling. But as they spoke to him, it became clear he wasn't afraid of the police. He was afraid of Kieran. Ryan was scared to say anything. Scared to snitch. Scared of what Kieran might do or what his friends might do if he talked. Because apparently, Kieran Stapleton had connections. People who weren't afraid to make others disappear, and Ryan Holden knew that. Police needed to know if Ryan Holden was telling the truth or just trying to save himself. Was he genuinely scared of Kieran Stapleton, or was this all just an act? So they evaluated the risk, looked into Kieran's background, his associates, his reputation on the estate, and what they found was chilling. Ryan wasn't exaggerating. Kieran Stapleton was dangerous. His circle of friends had a history of violence, and now, with Anuj's death, Kieran had proven that he was capable of murder and that he could do it without a flicker of hesitation. So police made a call. They didn't offer Ryan full identity protection, but they gave him support. Enough that he finally felt safe enough to talk, to open up, to tell them everything he saw that night. And he started with this. Kieran had just broken up with his girlfriend. It hadn't been a clean break either. Kieran was in a volatile headspace, not sad, not weepy, but furious. Angry at the world, angry at her, angry at the man she'd been cheating with. He'd been kicked out of their shared home, lost his driver's license, and was now couch surfing, staying with his mom, crashing wherever he could. Everything in his life was falling apart, and instead of looking inward, he lashed out. Ryan told police that Kiaran had said things like, "If I see him, I'll kill him." He was referring to the guy his ex had cheated with. But it wasn't just that one man anymore. Kiaran was bubbling with rage, and it was spilling out onto everything around him. Now, Ryan didn't explain why exactly the two of them were out walking the streets of Manchester at 1:30 a.m. that night. Maybe they were just out for no reason. Maybe Kiaran had a reason. But when they saw Anuj and his group of friends on the other side of the road, Ryan immediately noticed something. He said it was obvious they weren't from Salford. He said they were dark-skinned, that they were using a phone for directions, and that they didn't dress like locals. That one sentence carries so much weight, because in Kiaran's mind, it may have been enough. Anuj didn't know these boys, didn't look at them, didn't say anything. He and his friends were laughing, talking, and just enjoying the night. But as the two groups lined up on opposite sides of the street, Kiaran turned to Ryan and said, "Hang on a minute." Then he crossed the road. Ryan stayed where he was, didn't follow. He said he couldn't hear what was being said. He just stood there and watched from a distance. He saw Kiaran gesture to his wrist, like asking for the time. Then just seconds later, he saw Kiaran reach into his pocket, pull out a handgun, and shoot Anuj in the head. Just like that. Then Kiaran turned, screamed, "Run!" And Ryan did exactly that. He didn't know what else to do. He panicked. He ran with him. After the shooting, Kiaran Stapleton and Ryan Holden ran. They sprinted back through the quiet streets, past shuttered windows and dark alleyways, until they reached Kiaran's house on the Ordsall estate. When they got there, Ryan was in pieces, panicked, shaking, clearly traumatized by what had just happened. But Kiaran, he was the opposite, cool, calm, unbothered. He told Ryan to chill the F out, asterisk, asterisk. And when Ryan kept panicking, kept questioning everything, Kiaran leaned in and said, "Nah, don't fold on me. In other words, don't snitch. Don't talk, don't crack under pressure." That was Ryan's full statement. And for police, it was the most detailed version of events they'd had so far. It didn't change the fact that Kiaran had already been charged, but it would be critical at trial. And then, a week after the murder, on the 2nd of January, 2012, Kiaran Stapleton appeared in court for his initial hearing. When the judge asked him to state his name, he stood up and said, "Kiaran Psycho Stapleton." And it wasn't intimidating. It wasn't powerful. It was just pathetic. It was a boy trying to play the villain, bragging, performing, 1 week after taking a young man's life. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Anuj Bidve's family in India was struggling with a grief that went far beyond words. In Hindu culture, it's customary to cremate the deceased within 24 hours. But now, it had been over a week since their son had been murdered, and Anuj's body still hadn't been released. They understood, on a rational level. This was part of a murder investigation. The body was evidence. It had to stay for autopsies, ballistic testing, forensic examinations. They knew that, but that didn't make it any easier. They were thousands of miles away. They couldn't be by his side. They couldn't even begin the process of saying goodbye. And every hour that passed made the grief sharper. And the people of Manchester, they saw that. They saw the heartbreak. They saw how this family had found out about their son's death on Facebook, how they were cut off, grieving from afar, and completely alone. And they wanted to help. To show the Bid family that they were not alone, on the 2nd of January, 2012, just 1 week after Anuj Bidve was killed, the people of Manchester gathered in silence. A candlelit vigil was held in his memory. More than 400 people came. They held candles, brought flowers, left notes and messages, all these small, tender things that together became something much bigger. A makeshift memorial was built on the spot where he was shot. A place where people could come to reflect, to honor him, to say goodbye, And word of this reached Anuj's family back home in India. And when it did, they felt something they hadn't felt in days: comfort. Even though they were still oceans away, even though they had been left in the dark for so long, it meant the world to know that strangers were standing in the cold for their son, that he wasn't being forgotten, that anyone cared. The very next day, the Bid family was flown out to the UK. There were many reasons for the visit: to meet with police, to assist with the investigation, to finally bring their son's body home. But one of the most important things they did was visit the memorial. And when they got there, they were completely overwhelmed. There were hundreds of letters, folded and tucked beneath flowers, messages from strangers, from locals, from people who had never met Anuj but were still grieving with his family. One note read, "Rest in peace, Anuj, unlike your murderer who will rot in hell." And among all the tributes, there was one that stood out more than any other. It was small, simple, handwritten, left by Anuj's mother, "To our dearest son Anuj, from Mummy and Papa and our family. Sometimes it's not the loudest message that says the most. Sometimes it's just a quiet reminder that he was deeply loved, that he was deeply loved, that he was still their boy." The day after visiting the memorial in Manchester, Anuj's family flew back to India. They returned with his body, finally able to bring their son home. And while they were in the UK, relatives back in Pune had been preparing everything, organizing a funeral fit for the son, the brother, the friend that Anuj had been to so many. It was an open casket funeral. His body was gently placed, covered in flowers, and carried through the streets of Pune, the same streets he'd grown up on. And as they walked, it became clear just how many lives Anuj had touched. The crowds were enormous. People lined the streets, standing shoulder to shoulder. Some were crying. Some stood in silence. Some just came to be present, to say goodbye in the only way they could. At the funeral, Anuj's father stood up to speak. His voice cracked as he addressed the crowd. And in that moment, his words were simple, but they said everything. When Anuj left India in September last year, he was full of hope and ambition for the future. We were all so very proud of him. Anuj was our only son, and we cannot comprehend this dreadful tragedy. And honestly, I don't think anyone could. There's something about a young person dying that never quite feels real. When a life so full of promise is taken in a moment of senseless violence, there's no clean way to make peace with it, no way to explain it, no words that make it okay. And as the people of Pune stood still that day, watching the Bid family say goodbye, you could feel that weight, that this should never have happened. Kieran Stapleton's trial began in July 2012. And right from the start, he tried to deny responsibility, pleading not guilty to murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But the prosecution wasn't having it. They argue rightfully that if you aim a loaded gun at someone's head and pull the trigger, you absolutely intend to cause serious harm or death. There's no room for ambiguity. That's not panic. That's not a moment of confusion. That's a deliberate decision. Kieran Stapleton intended to kill. And truthfully, his defense team had no rebuttal. Because how could they argue with that? There was no reasonable explanation, no excuse that could stretch far enough to cover what he did. Still, as part of the legal process, psychiatric assessments were carried out. Maybe he was unwell. Maybe there was something deeper going on. But what they found was complicated. Kieran didn't have a diagnosed mental illness, but he did show antisocial personality traits, things like lack of empathy, an inability to feel guilt, no real remorse. He wasn't disconnected from reality. He just didn't care. And in the end, the psychiatrist concluded that Kieran Stapleton was mentally sound. He knew exactly what he was doing. So, the diminished responsibility defense? Gone. At one point during the trial, the prosecution asked him if he thought the psychiatric results might keep him out of prison, as in, if they had found something, maybe he'd go to a hospital instead. And Kieran's response? To be honest, I'm not bothered. I love prison. Lock me up for 65 years. He said it like it was a joke. And over the course of the 5-week trial, Kieran Stapleton only seemed to care less and less. He'd sit there in the courtroom and laugh. smirk, sometimes even giggle when the details of Anuja's murder were being read aloud. He wasn't anxious, he wasn't remorseful, he was entertained. Because for him, the trial was a break from prison, something to do, a day out. And for everyone else in the courtroom, for Anuja's family, for the jury, for the public, it was devastating to witness. Because this wasn't just a killer. This was a man who wanted an audience. Oh, and there's one more thing I forgot to mention earlier. At one point during the trial, Kieran Stapleton turned to the jury, smirked, and said, "Look at this face. Does it look bothered?" It was cringy. It wasn't intimidating or clever. It was a man-child, playing games with people who had just listened to days of evidence about how he executed someone in cold blood. But the jury didn't play along. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, they came back with their verdict. Guilty of the murder of Anuj Bidve. They completely rejected his diminished responsibility defense. And honestly, how could they not? He got a teardrop tattoo days after the shooting. He checked into a hotel overlooking the crime scene. He laughed through the trial. He mocked the court. He showed no remorse. If anything, the opposite. These weren't the actions of someone who lost control. These were the actions of someone who wanted to be remembered for it. And so, the judge handed down his sentence. Life in prison with no chance of parole for 30 years. That means the earliest Kieran Stapleton can even be considered for release is the year 2042. And even then, it's unlikely. Because in all the time since Anuja's murder, Kieran has shown no regret, no apology, no growth. Only mockery. And you can't parole someone who's never once said they were sorry.